So how do I switch this?
It's on.
What's on? Okay. Well, it really is a pleasure to be here. And it's something to kind of fast forward like 800 to 900 years into the present time. The situation isn't quite as promising. And basically what, my goal today, just to talk to you a little bit about sort of more personal engagement with Islam and science, and sort of from the perspective of an evolutionary biologist. And so I just wanted to, of course, start with an obvious statement that I'm Muslim, with the opening statement, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Okay. What I'm trying to do at McGill is we've started something called the McGill Centre for Islam and Science. Oh, you can find. Yeah, so we're trying to start something with Islam and Science. It's Dr. Professor Jamil Rajab, Anila Azhar, and myself. And we're trying to see, just putting together a historical perspective, an education perspective, and a science policy perspective, how can we put our brains together as sort of a think tank to try and brainstorm about how we can improve the situation of science in Muslim countries in general. Can you just click on that, the link, if you can, possibly? And it's just to say that, we've got a number of events happening. We have one coming at McGill. It's just about to pop up. So we have an upcoming workshop, October 22nd to 24th, called Science Teaching in Contemporary Islamic Societies. So all the challenges that are involved, and these are the types of activities and workshops that we put on. Okay. So just go back.
You switch back. Other way.
The other way? No. No. Which way? Why isn't it closing? No.
Oh, no, there you go.
Okay.
Keep going, one more.
Which way?
Same way you just went.
I didn't go anywhere. I was here and not here.
So as I said, the situation, if this is any sort of,
Now I can handle it.
now you can handle it. Gotcha. Okay, so next slide. Yeah, next slide, please. Sorry. I only have one more link after that. But it's just to say, I grew up as a Muslim myself in a Muslim household. That's me when I was like 4 or 5 years old. That's my aunt. Next, my son. This is his pictures of him in Amman, Jordan. He's growing up as a Muslim. But at the same time, if you can go next slide, I'm an evolutionary biologist, and we work in the field of ants to tell us something grander about evolution. So this is my last 2 papers. This was one sort of making news in the journal Science. For many of you who work in science, it's sort of the more prestigious journal. But it goes on here, you see, Arizona's virgin ant queens could shed light on the predictability of evolution. So we use ants as a model to understand the process of evolution. The next slide, this is my second to last paper. We have something a bit more fancy. Researchers nearly double the size of work around. So I have a lot of fun, right? in the world of science. And I experience what George was talking about, Professor Saliba was talking about, this sort of miraculous sort of moment of discovery, and I just wish that many scientists in the Muslim world could experience that sort of moment of miraculous discovery, but it can't happen unless there are systems to encourage that, unless we're in the right environment. There's a lot of work to be done so that we can bring out the talent in the Islamic world, and to bring a greater, perhaps as Professor Ahmed has said, more logic and more thinking about these types of logic and interconnections between fields. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the 3 things I just want to address in less than 15 minutes, which is a tall order, but I just wanted to sort of get it started and kick it so that we can have these sort of discussions. But the idea is, okay, so why is understanding for evolution important for Muslims? What evolution is and is not? And what does the Holy Qur'an say and does not say about evolution? Okay, so clearly it's just to get the discussion started. There's no way I can cover these in any substantive way. But let's just, let's see what we can do. Okay, next slide. Okay, so most people Okay, think about the controversy between science and religion, sort of in the idea of creation versus evolution. Do not let Darwin make a monkey out of you, as this is sort of saying this idea. You know, it's a fight about our origins, where we come from, who we are, how we regulate our society. But I just want to make a point that understanding evolution goes far beyond this debate between creation and evolution. This is not a philosophical debate. It's not only about a philosophical debate about our origins and where we're coming from. Next slide. But in fact, I will make the contention, and I teach an entire course at McGill University on the relationship between evolution and society. And we cover, and you can see all of these, evolution and race, the notions how evolution affect our notions of race, of religion, as I just said, but of politics, of economics, of medicine, of agriculture, of gender and intelligence. It affects essentially, and it has deep effects. I mean, people get killed over ideologies of how we think about evolution and how it pervades our society. Next. Okay, so for example, I'll just give you sort of the deep influence of, for example, evolutionary thinking in the United States. So John D. Rockefeller, net worth in 2007 was $366 billion. He founded the University of Chicago and Rockefeller University, of course. And he is quoted as supporting building his philosophy of business on what he called social Darwinism. And just a quote from John D. Rockefeller: "The growth of a large business is merely the survival of the fittest." So clearly, sort of the idea of building, one of the founding fathers of capitalism in the United States, built his ideas on evolution. And so you can see the profundity of how ideas can charge an entire system of the way we operate our businesses and our lives. Next. Okay, and of course, even today, as we think, this is a book by Saunders, Doug Saunders, a journalist, a Canadian journalist. He's written, it's called The Myth of the Muslim Tide. Do immigrants threaten the West? And the whole premise of the book, and especially relevant today, this notion that, of course, you know, there are tons of refugees fleeing from the Middle East into both Europe and North America. And so he wrote this, of course, maybe about 10 years ago. And the premise of the book is sort of an evolutionary one. It's the idea that when immigrants come, do they change the culture somehow? Do they take over? Will they overwrite tired, what was thought to be tired European populations that are not growing? And the Muslims, of course, there's sort of ideas that are floating around that Muslims come, they have a higher birth rate, that within, you know, about 20 years, all of Europe will be a majority Muslim. And, you know, of course, this will threaten the culture, the ideas. And so it's this sort of struggle and survival for the fittest. But these kinds of ideas, although just it sounds sort of a little ridiculous, he examines the claims of these ideas. But these ideas have led to people being killed, I said. These are you know, policies being put in place to stop immigration, policies being put in place to change culture, to change people, and there are many implicit ideas that come from these types of things. And so it's very important that we understand evolution, not just for the sake of our origins, not only for the sake of medicine, because of course evolution is the center of biology, but also for our own sociological and political ideologies. Okay, next. Okay, so what is evolution? So I'm just going to kind of take you a tour on just 5 minutes of what evolution actually is. Evolution simply, no, sorry, back one, yeah. So, oh, no, back one. Back. The other way. The other way, yeah. Back. Okay, so what evolution? So if you think about the word evolution in the broadest sense, it's simply change over time. So anything can evolve. Fashion can evolve, cars can evolve, your shoes can evolve, everything can. But the idea is just change over time. But when we think about the kind of evolution Darwin was talking about, next, is biological evolution. And when we think about biological evolution, what it really means is descent with modification of all organisms from common ancestors, simply and broadly, so that from a common ancestor you get descendants, and those descendants become modified through the process of evolution. And this notion of biological evolution, next, this is a fact. So we often hear about this idea that evolution is a theory, okay? But in fact, when you define biological evolution in this way, it's actually a fact. The theory of evolution is how this process rolls out. So how, who were our common ancestors? People argue about all the time. How they descended, how they modified, who's related to who. These are all things that scientists argue and critique about. And this is where you get the ideas of theories of evolution, things where you have a decent number of facts to support. But we don't quite all agree. But the idea that you have common ancestors, descendants who are modified, that's a fact. How that actually all happens, we still have a long way to go about figuring all this out. And that's what we call the theory. So evolution is both a fact and a theory. Okay, next. All right. So the thing is, I'm just going to point out one of the challenges that Muslims will have in sort of accepting evolution, and then also for professors to teach evolution. And this is one of what I think is the key, and I call it the curse of the scala naturae. If you can link, I'm just going to do a small experiment here. If Salman's going to do it for me. So if you went to Google right now, into your computers, into your phones, and you just typed in evolution, right? Okay? If you do that, this is what you see. If you can just extend the whole screen so everybody can see. Right. If you just keep going. Okay. What you get is this image. Who's seen this image before? Right? Just put up your hands. Okay. Of course, this is called the monkey to man. It's the monkey to man cartoon. It basically pervades. It's one of the most powerful scientific illustrations over the last century. There's no question about it. It came out in the early 1900s by Thomas Huxley and has been adopted as sort of a symbol of evolution. And so this is, unfortunately, extremely powerful, but also incorrect. If you can move on just to, sorry, now the slides.
To the left.
Sorry?
4 fingers swipe to the left.
4 fingers swipe to the left. Which left?
To the left. Oh, the other way.
It's not going the other way.
Yeah,
There you go.
It's right
okay,
here.
Right back. Okay, so we go to the next slide. Okay, so I mean, just to show you that this is just outside my house. I was just walking to work, and I mean, just to show you, I mean, I don't have to work very hard or go very far, just to show you that it's everywhere, and so clearly, this is self-explanatory here. And if we don't do something about this, evolution and Islam will go down the toilet. So, okay, next. Sorry, okay. So this was something, we had a debate in the Dean Institute over the ideas of Islam. And this is the image that they used to portray that debate, okay? And so next slide, okay, as I was saying, this is inaccurate, okay? And so I'm going to tell you the reasons why it's inaccurate, and it's because it portrays a linear view of evolution. So next. Okay, so evolution is not linear, and that's the problem, because if you think about literally a monkey to man, it looks as if you just go back 1, 2 actually, it looks as if here that literally you get the transformation of a monkey into a Neanderthal, into pre-modern man, into modern man, and it's sort of like a literal transformation of one to another. And so this is not really, if you think about it in linear terms, it's not really how evolution works. Okay, so now 2 forward. Okay, all right. And this comes from sort of back from Aristotle. It's the notion of what Charles Bonnet called the scala naturae. And so the idea is, of course, when you sort of characterize life, you characterize it as a linear scale. And so if you take it from the bottom, you go to, it goes from inanimate matter to, organic matter. And so, of course, if according to this sort of plan of evolution, you go from ethereal matter, air, water, pure earth, compound earths, sulfur, bitumens, malleable metals, semi-metals, vitriols, crystalline salts, unorganized stones, stones composed of layers, fibers, and filaments, and then the major step of evolution, the truffle, okay? And so you have this sort of linear ladder, and then you keep going until you hit insects, then shellfish, then reptiles, then fish, then birds, quadrupeds, and then finally you get to man. And this, of course, this is what this monkey to man image is based on, and even Thomas Huxley, when he first drew the image, sort of harked back to this. And it gives the idea of progress. It gives the idea that at the tip of evolution is finally the final culmination with perfection and progress, which is man. But this is not quite how evolution works. Next slide. Okay, so here it's just to show, this is according to the Scala Naturae, or the monkey to man, that you go from a multicellular creature to a fungus to a plant to an animal. That you literally get a transformation from a fungi to a plant to an animal. Next. Okay, and this is just flipping it this way, so it shows literal transformation. Next. Okay, but that's wrong. Okay, you don't literally go from a fungi to a plant to an animal. In fact, fungi are more closely related to animals than they are to plants. Next. Okay, this is actually now how we should think about evolution. It's a tree. It's a family tree, just as you're related to your brothers and sisters and cousins, and going far back to your common ancestors. This is how evolution works. So rather than, it doesn't make sense that you go from a plant to a fungi and to an animal. We never think of a fungi transforming literally into a plant. But instead, we are related, and we share common ancestors. Next. And so, yeah, got you. Okay, we just have to tell you how the Qur'an says about evolution and solve that problem, but we'll work it out, right? So the idea is you more probably had a single cell organism that all these lineages go back about 500 to 1,000 million years. There was probably a single cell organism that independently split and developed into a plant, into a fungi, and into an animal. And instead of one invention of multicellularity that turns into a plant and a fungi into an animal, here you had more like 3 different times. But what they shared was neither a plant, nor a fungi, nor an animal. It was a single cell organism. It was neither of them, but they each developed in their own lineages into that. Okay, next. So you can think about the same thing when you think about gorillas, chimps, and humans. Next. Okay, so they didn't literally transform into each other. Next. They shared a common ancestor. So the idea is, of course, the ancestor of a chimp was a human, was neither chimp, neither human. It was something that was of obviously that form, but you couldn't have called it human or a chimp at that point. They each then diverged and developed into their own lines in this sort of tree-like form. Descent with modification from a common ancestor. Okay? How that happened, when that happened, we still get these discoveries of fossils every day, of things every day. This is the theory, but the fact that this happened, this is a fact. Okay? Next. Okay, so what does the Holy Qur'an say about evolution? And this becomes, because now we have to accept this descent as a fact, this descent with modification. So what does it mean for a Muslim who's an evolutionary biologist? How do I deal with this? And so I just read the Qur'an from front to cover as an evolutionary biologist, looking for consistencies and inconsistencies. And I'm just going to tell you the ayahs that stood out to me that we could potentially interpret in the light of modern science. Okay, it's not, and we can go back. Okay, so next slide. So we first start with Surah An-Nur, okay, 35, ayah 45. It says, the translation, I have the Arabic text there. And Allah has created every animal from water. Every animal from water. Of them, there are some that creep on their bellies, and some that walk on 2 legs. Okay? And some that walk on 4. Allah creates what He wills, for verily Allah has power over all things. And so the idea is, we don't look, as an evolutionary biologist, at least I don't look for this as some kind of, this is what you call ajaz. I don't look to this to say, is this predicting something about how evolution should work? I'm just looking for simple consistency. Is this consistent with the notion of evolution? And it is. Next. And if you take every single verse, if you think about humans, the origin of humans, if you look at, let's look to see what Allah says about the creation of humans and see from what material He has created humans from. And when you go through, you see that basically He's created humans from water, earth, and next to it is the surah and the ayah. Water, earth, dust, clay, a leech-like or blood-like clot, a sperm drop, flesh, and a single soul. So if you go to the next surah, so the idea is that He's created from all these materials. Okay? So the thing is, when we think about all of these together, we think of then, clay and a leech-like blood. But here, taken together, the above surahs and verses indicate that humans were not created in a single instant, but were created gradually and in multiple stages. Okay? And that's all the consistency we look for. Next. Okay? And again, this is my personal reading as an evolutionary biologist. You may agree or disagree, and there's open for discussion, of course. And then is a Surah Al-Kahf that shows, again, this kind of, it wasn't a single instant, that it happened in multiple stages. Again, that's all we look for. And I want to just say that I should probably scratch the word gradually, because we don't even know if it was gradually or when. It could have happened really fast, really slow, but the multiple stages is the most important. So let's look over here. Dost thou, almost done. Next, we'll go back. Dost thou deny him who created thee out of dust? Then, thumma, out of a sperm drop, then fashioned thee into a man. So again, giving the idea of sort of multiple stages again. Again, consistent, that's all we care about. Next. All right, again, what is the matter with you that ye are not conscious of Allah's majesty, seeing that he has created you in diverse stages? Okay? And Allah has produced you from the earth growing gradually. All right, again, some kind of multiple stages one more time. Okay, next. All right, and we'll skip this one since we only have a few minutes. Okay, and again this one, we created man from a breed, solala, from clay, a kind of chain from clay again. So all of these things that point to evidence that it was done in diverse stages, in multiple steps, and not sort of some kind of snap of the fingers of an instant, which is again consistent with evolutionary biology. And then we can just stop at that point because we don't want to get into too many details, because Quran is not a book of science. It's a different kind of book. Yes, next. Okay, next. Okay, so there is consistency in my view between Islam and evolution. Next. Okay, so all I want to say is now, one has to differentiate what's written in the Quran from scholars who interpreted the Quran. And so the following scholars have actually talked about evolution prior to Darwin. The idea of evolution predated Darwin by quite some time. It's even known that, Darwin's grandfather talked about the concept of evolution. What Darwin did was come with a mechanism of evolution, and that's natural selection. So all of these, I just name a few scholars, but there are many more, who've actually talked about evolution. Ibn Khaldun, Ibn Maskawayh, Ibn al-Arabi, Rumi, but they all talked about evolution in the Aristotelian way, the scala naturae. The idea that, in their interpretation of evolution is sort of like the monkey to man drawing. That's scala naturae, and they sort of probably somehow, this needs lots of study from historians. I open this up to historians of science. It's an area of need of lots of study and an area of raw requirement. So they interpreted the Quran in evolution, and we can't say, oh look, they're wrong, so the Quran is wrong. We just have to differentiate their interpretations from what's actually written in the Quran. Next. And so here's an interesting question I leave again for historians and for the public in general. But to me, one of the things that needs serious study is the book Kitab al-Hayawan by al-Jahiz, written about 1820, and it raises the question, was he actually talking about natural selection now, which is the mechanism of evolution, something akin to Darwin? And of course I know it's been drilled into me that historians say yes, but you have to put it into the context of the time that these words were written. So I have no idea, but I raise the question. And he writes, animals engage in a struggle for existence, for resources to avoid being eaten and to breed. Environmental factors influence organisms to develop new characteristics to ensure survival, thus transforming into new species. Animals that survive to breed can pass on their successful characteristics to offspring. It sounds very familiar to Darwin's theory of natural selection. Of course, Darwin discovered natural selection at the same time Wallace did. But Darwin gets the credit because he did the most amount of work and assembled the evidence. But this would be a huge step for Muslims and science as well to show that there was at least some preliminary thinking of natural selection. But of course, that's required for scholars. Thank you very much.